Ceylon or Sri Lanka, India, Asia, Africa. 50 million deaths due to the United Nations Environmental Program playing games. That puts them above Stalin, above Mao Zedong. And yet these criminals are doing all kinds of things to us. And that is fact. But let's come back to what Sophie mentioned, the previous question. CFMEU. It represents the coal miners, supposedly. I was a member of the CFMEU because the first job I had after graduating from university as a mining engineer was to work underground, work in the surface mine at first, and then mostly underground for about 3 years to get practical experience at the coalface. So I was a member of the CFMEU. The CFMEU is supposed to represent coal miners. The CFMEU funded $1.3 million to start GetUp. What is GetUp's number one campaign around this country? Stop coal mining. The CFMEU miners are paying their dues to the CFMEU to give to GetUp to stop their jobs. That's the state of what's happening in this country. The union movement, the large unions, generally, with a few exceptions, don't look after unions. They're too busy looking after union bosses' careers. And who was a union boss before he entered Parliament? Who gave away to deals with multinationals the penalty rates? Bill Shorten, hundreds of thousands of his members in the AWU. Who was a foundation board of director? Who was on the foundation board of directors of GetUp? Bill Shorten. That's what we're headed for. And I agree entirely with Sophie. That's why we've got to have anyone but the other two tight old parties controlling the Senate. We are the insurance policy. You cannot afford to let this man become Prime Minister without control in the Senate.
Thank you very much. Thank you very much, Malcolm. I empathise with you very strongly because I do remember London fogs when I was a child and you couldn't see a hand in front of your face. And I have had malaria, so I empathise with you. Now, somebody had their hand up and that was you. And who are you directing your question to?
Craig.
Craig, yes.
Hi, Craig. Malcolm Jews. I have a question that perhaps the whole debate is a bit of a smokescreen, and you seem to be more in touch with the world, so maybe you can answer this. I think what the world is really calling out for is a new dense energy source. With cheap enough energy, there is no water problem. You can desalinate water anywhere. You can transport water from the north of Australia to the south if you had all the energy. You could feed everyone. You could have huge cities with fast transport. We could solve all the stuff that we've solved in the history, in the past. Is there a smokescreen going of an argument that confuses and that says all we can have is these three options, and why aren't we working for things like fusion power and other solutions?
Thanks, Malcolm. No, there's no smokescreen. It's just all about the money. It's about the virtue signalling. It's about attracting political support. Even if let's say that Malcolm Roberts is 100% wrong, and say the IPC, their computer models, let's say they've got it measured exactly precisely right, and if you adjust the level of CO2 like a thermostat, you can sort of turn the temperature to what you want. Let's just assume that's correct. Right? As the chief scientist said, straight, what we do makes no difference. But then you say, okay, well, everyone goes into Paris. If every single nation meets what they've promised reductions for Paris, which I think hardly any nation is doing, other than a handful of nations are doing it at the moment, but if every single nation met those Paris reductions, the numbers are, it's 1/20th of 1 degree by the year 2100. That's the USA in, right? So if everyone meets their target, that's how much warming we are avoiding, 1/20th of 1 degree. Now, so there's no, it's simply a lot of virtually politicians like to stand up, it's a popular issue, and they don't like to be criticised. On the issue of nuclear power, I'm the only member of Parliament with a nuclear reactor in his electorate. And I say that proudly. And this is at Lucas Heights, which is down in my electorate. Yes, yeah. And when I was first elected, I wasn't sort of too sure how to approach it, because do you make a bit of an issue about it? People think there's a nuclear reactor down, it's terrible, And I can remember, when it was being built down there, it was the protesters out the front, and but I've come to the absolutely crystal clear conclusion that I stand up and I proudly say, I have a nuclear reactor in my electorate. You know what? My family home's about 5 k's away from where it is. And you know one thing, when we built that nuclear reactor as a nation, you know where we had to go to get the technology? Argentina. We had to go to basically a South American nation, right, with a fraction of the GDP that we have, because they had the technology and we didn't. Because we had this complete ban on nuclear power. So we had a ban to pay, again, this goes back to the 70s. There was a ban in Australia on developing any nuclear power. Now, in the 70s, it probably made sense, because unlike a nation like France who didn't have the coal, we didn't really need nuclear power. We had plenty of coal, so we didn't need to worry about the nuclear power. Now, what will it be? What technology is going to be developed? Whether it's fusion or these new nuclear small modular reactors that I read about. What's the technology going to be in 10 years' time? I don't know, but we need to, as a nation, be making sure that all those technologies are available to us. And we also need, as a nation that has more uranium reserves than anyone else, we should have our own scientists and researchers, like we do in the medical field, also developing it in the electricity generation field from nuclear power. So what I'd like to say, and I've made a speech in this in Parliament, so Senator Jim Molan made a speech also in Parliament this week and wrote an article in the Australian the other day, he's calling. And I think the best way to approach this is that we've got a legislation that says there's complete ban. We actually put an amendment to that act that says that ban expires, let's pick a date, 2025. Right, if we want to build a nuclear power tomorrow, you're not going to get up by 2025 anywhere. Let's send a message to industry and our researchers that by 2025, that prohibition on nuclear power will no longer exist. And that would enable our nation not only to invest in the technology to develop this. If we have a ban on nuclear tech, how can we have researchers doing these things? And we've got some absolutely brilliant work going on down there at research into nuclear medicines and nuclear science down there at Lucas Heights. We're about to extend that to nuclear power. And who knows, one of our researchers may be able to come up with a way of producing some type of nuclear or fusion power that will be so much more cheaper and be 100% CO2 free, if that proves to be a real important issue on the track.
Now, I think we can take only one more question from somebody who said nothing. Yourself, come on.
Thank you, David. My question is an extension of a question that Jeff asked earlier. Isn't it about time we put these people on trial? And are people aware that there is a solution right in the middle of Canberra? There's called the Magna Carta Monument, and on that Magna Carta Monument it says Magna Carta is now regarded as a traditional mandate for trial by jury, accountable government, justice for all, and no arbitrary imprisonment. Now, there are other quotes I could make, all referring to our solution is right in front of our eyes, but we are not educated to using it. Now, would it not be better to go back to our Constitution, which has its basis in Magna Carta, and discovering how we can govern ourselves? In fact, there's another quote from a fellow in America called Ted Howdowich, and he said that there are 4 boxes in the defence of liberty: the soap box, the ballot box, the jury box, and the ammo box. Now, we're flogging the second box, which is getting us nowhere, because there was a quote I saw on TV the other day. He said, no matter who wins the election, the government still gets in. So who is the government? And Malcolm said, we are handing our sovereignty over to the United Nations. Now, should not we regain our sovereignty, exercise our rights, and put these people on trial in the common law way? Thank you.
Directed to?
To Malcolm, because he said that we're losing our sovereignty.
What's your name?
John.
John, thank you for the question. Craig's going to jump in as well at the end of this. You can just see him. I've already mentioned the solution is to get back to our constitution. We're not complying with our constitution now. No way. Not even close. So far as a trial, we've got to have a crime that's got to be exposed first. So that would take some doing. And maybe we can talk about it later, because you're shaking your head, John. It would take time, it would take money, and it would be very elusive. I think there's probably a better way, and I'd encourage people to stay tuned early in the new year, because the ultimate court in this country is the court of public opinion. Think about this. This scam has been going for 40 years. Other scams have just folded under. But there'd be very few people in this room who believe this nonsense. There's a growing number of people in the country who don't believe it, and a growing number who are questioning it. And so what we can see is that people are at last starting to understand. We're getting to the point where there's going to be a perfect storm on our side pretty soon, because we're all being hit in the hip pocket. But there's something more important to Australians than the hip pocket. Both the tired old parties, the failed old parties, think that this is all that matters. Is it? People in this room are more concerned about values and identity. Australians, how we behave, who we are as Australians, what it represents. Isn't that right?
Yes.
We would all be willing to pay a little bit more if it meant improving our values, restoring our constitution, restoring our sense of identity with the country that's being trashed all around us. So we've got to make sure that people can see the full weight of this. Now the farmers are paying the price, because as I said, John Howard has stolen their land right, their property rights, and sacrificed them to the great God UN. They're paying hundreds, certainly tens of millions, maybe tens of millions, maybe hundreds of billions. And that's not right. So what we'll be asking for is restoration of property rights or compensation, as the Constitution says. Restoration or compensation. So I think that there's a mechanism already there, but I'm happy to talk with you about the court system. Think about something else too. How humans develop. Now, the person who studied humans more closely than anyone else in the development of humans, I'd argue, is Maria Montessori. An amazing woman, very objective, but I won't go into the details. She, like many other people are now confirming, found that we form the primary years for the development of both character and intellect are 0 to 6. Our patterns of reaction to threats, to fears, and all the rest of it are largely settled by the time we're 6. And they certainly settle by the time we get to puberty. Then we have all kinds of interactions with experience and so on. What I'm getting to is that we need to get back to tap into the creativity of humans, and the only way to do that is get government out of their lives. Minimise government. The second thing is, the worst form of government is central government. Our constitution was set up so that the central government looks after border security, foreign affairs, defence and exercise between states. Get the rest out. Get it back to the states. We have an education department in state and federal. Get it back to the states where it was. We have a health department that's duplicated in both. Get it back to the states where it was. We have an environmental that's duplicated. Get it back to the states where it belongs. The states should be doing most of this. Why? Because they have accountability. Because if they stuff something up in this state, people move to Queensland or Western Australia. That's competitive federalism. That's how it was designed. Joh Bjelke-Petersen, as the Premier of Queensland, abolished estate duties, death duties. And what happened? People moved to Queensland. That's why the Gold Coast took off. And what happened? Every state abolished death duties. That's what competitive federalism is all about. It works. It worked brilliantly up until about the 1920s and then has been whittled down. So all we have to do is restore our constitution. But think about this. We now have 2 mobs in Canberra. What's the worst form of government you can get? Mob rule. We have a Liberal mob and a Labor mob. And they do what they're told unless they're Craig Kelly. They just follow like slaves. They do what they're told. I think it's Michael Photius in this state, isn't it? And federally through Turnbull and the others. And he's not even elected. But ask any Liberal Party person who runs the Liberal Party. Who runs the Labor Party? The backroom power brokers. So who funded GetUp along with Bill Shorten being on the board of directors and the CFMEU funding them? Who else funded them? What was that name again? George Soros. Corrupter of many countries, whole countries. What we've got to do is recognise that mob rule doesn't work. We have to restore our constitution because that's where the accountability comes. Get most of the duties back to the states where competitive federalism ensures accountability, because it'll be very difficult to get accountability in the Commonwealth government because there's no competition for it. The next thing I would just want to point out is I'd just like to think about, I'll take this opportunity to ask you to think about something else, and that is the extreme arrogance of the Greens in the United Nations. They think that by us exhaling carbon dioxide, we can control the climate on this planet. If we were to have a thermostat that we controlled the temperature of this planet, we would increase it because warming is beneficial. If we were to have a control that manipulated the carbon dioxide levels, we would increase it because it encourages greening of the planet. Fact. They think we can control this planet. We can't. The second thing is, they're telling us that we must stop our evolution now. Look at where we've come in the last 10,000 years. Look at where we've come in the last 170 years. Look at where we've come in the last 10 years. And they're telling us what we can do in the future. They think they can control evolution. They want to play God. And they're ignorant, deceitful, dishonest, liars, and they don't understand what really runs this planet and this universe. It's their arrogance as well as their deceit and their flagrant disregard for the environment and their flagrant disregard for human life. The Greens and the lefty in the Labor Party. Extremely arrogant, now want to control evolution. Craig?
If an election was held last weekend, the news poll, which is always reasonably accurate, shows that we in the coalition would have lost in a landslide. And a Labor-Greens government would have a smashing majority in the House of Representatives. And yet, they have a policy when it comes to electricity of copying South Australia. Now, you can always speculate what will happen if you have a 50% renewable energy target. Some people is good or bad. We have an example. We've done the experiment. It's called South Australia. It delivered the highest electricity prices, not only in the nation, in the world. It caused a record number of people to have their electricity cut off. And that is the official policy of the Labor Party that leads the polls 55-45 and is headed for government unless we can swing it around in the next several months. We've also got that same government that is leading in those polls. They've looked at what we committed to at Paris, and I could argue that all night, which is a 26% reduction of 2005 levels. But when you take that per capita, per population, because our population has been growing so much faster than all these other countries, that makes our 26% reduction per capita about a 50% reduction. It is the most onerous in the world. And Labor say, that's not good enough, we want more. We don't like your 26%, we want to take it to a 45% reduction off 2005 levels. And we want to do it economy-wide. So forget, as I said, electricity only makes up a third. I've done some rough numbers on you to get it, that reduction in your agricultural herd. You would need to cull 1.1 million pigs, 1.1 million dairy cattle, 10.6 million beef cattle, and 32.4 million sheep. That is how the herd reductions you would have to have in your agricultural sector, and that is the policy of the alternate opposition that's leading a long way in the polls. Then we get to road transportation. How are we going to get, and remember, they want a reduction of 2005 levels. Our emissions from road transportation have increased dramatically since 2005. So the only way you're going to do that is take half the cars off the road. Make the right to own a car one of the greatest freedoms that we have. I know one of the first things, as soon as I get my licence, I got my licence. It's the ability to sit behind that motor car and drive wherever you want is one of the greatest freedoms that we have. They want to take that away. The idea that you can do it in electric cars is absurd. Air travel, you'd have to cut air travel in half in this nation. You'd have to close down half the mines in the nation. Close down half the industry and businesses that use gas in the plastics factory. This is the official policy of the Labor Party that is leading us in the polls. Look at a landslide. So that's why it's not, I see it, every single one of you here have got a duty to get out there and talk about this. Because we've got to fight against it, we've got to stand up and we've got to explain, if that's what you really want, go and vote for the Labor Party and the Greens at the next election. Because it does, I know Malcolm talks about the two tight old parties, but the reality is one of us is going to be running the show in the House of Reps. One of us is going to be providing the Prime Minister, and one of us is going to be in charge of the Treasury benches. Yes, we'll have to get things through the Senate, but okay. But one of the, it's either the Liberal Party or the Labor Party backed by the Greens. They're going to be in the House of Representatives within 5 months. Now, unless we explain to people and get out there and tell them what these policies will do, what it will do to people's standard of life, the hardships that it will inflict, the jobs that will be lost. Unless we do that, I'd say we're going to deserve what we get.
Oh, that's true.
It was great you came tonight, and we've learnt a lot more than we ever thought we would. That's why the roundtable forums exist, so that we can learn and grow and be on the cutting edge of knowledge. Now, I would like to invite a member of the executive of Western Heritage Australia, Dr. Jim Sternhill, to present the vote of thanks to our panel of 3 very good speakers. Thank you, Jim.
Normally we try and have a balance politically of speakers, but we just couldn't find someone to defend energy price hikes. Mind you, one of our people suggested Alan Finkel, and I thought that would create a little bit of friction. I think Craig owes Malcolm an apology for having Alan Finkel's photo up there for so long. I could see Malcolm just sort of, he needed that bath box. He really did. A couple of things just to expound on that, the general topics, points that haven't been raised before. Christiana Figueres, the head of the IPCC, 4th of January 2013, in an interview with The Guardian, said, "Democracy is a poor system for fighting global warming. Communist China is the best model." That should say it all. Here she was proposing the iron fist of totalitarianism to combat a problem that's never been debated. There's never actually been a debate on that. Another very sobering point that no one's ever brought up, 10,000 years ago in the Neolithic, the planet supported just 7 million humans. Now we have 7 billion, and that's mainly because of the ready availability of inexpensive and reliable energy. So if we had to go back to all this greeny virtue signalling rubbish, we're going to have to make this planet, wait for it, 99.9% human free. They never tell us that, do us? So who will be that lucky 1 in 1,000 that's going to survive? Well, it's not going to be me. I'm way too old. And yeah, less said about my politics, and my head's going to be chopped off about 20 times, actually. The consensus, that is, you have an argument with a greenie. Oh, the 97% consensus. Well, that's a semantic manipulation. I mentioned before with the 2013 Cook et al. That was a very large study. It was semantic manipulation. They changed 0.3%, which is actually a little bit smaller, and 0 in terms of the really catastrophic stuff, into 97%. What a great manipulation that is. Talk about lies, damn lies and statistics.
Who were the 3 dummies who don't believe in climate change out of 100? I mean, 97% they said, but who were the 3 dummies who said it doesn't happen?
Well, what they did, Cook et al., they lumped together all these, the broad consensus, the unquantified ones, just the broadly, it does a bit to it, and they lumped it into that tiny subset of the proof positives.
Wouldn't you think 100% know that climate change is real?
Well, yeah, climate changes. I mean, if you look at it, the whole climate change, what does it mean? It's 2 nouns without a qualifying pronoun. So it means either nothing at all, 0, or whatever you want to say it is.
It has to be, it's only
Yeah. Well, that's right. It's right. Climate change, it actually means nothing. And yet here we are allowing energy prices to go up and up and up. People's incomes haven't gone up and up. So I reckon we all feel like we're being squeezed to death by a Queensland python. I dare say Malcolm knows more about Queensland pythons than I do. And the business of just chopping out coal altogether, I mean, you think, who thought through this? How are you going to make the steel to make wind turbines if you have no coal?
That's right.
I mean, they're just so short-sighted, they couldn't even think of that. Another little point that no one ever seems to mention, maybe it's just too politically incorrect, the Nazis, National Socialist German Workers' Party, they were born of the Übergrün, ultra-green movement. I wonder who that describes now. And the UN have exactly the same core ideals as the Nazis. And all this boils down to the UN. Up until they booted me off Facebook, I was referring to them as United Nazis, and that indeed is what they are. We should all be supporting only parties that stand for Australian sovereignty, and that means booting out the UN. The UN select their own high officials. They have deemed themselves beyond prosecution, so they're completely opaque. And here we are doing whatever they say. Oh, you must bring so-and-so refugees in. You must, Lima Declaration 1975, signed by Whitlam, ratified by Fraser, so the two are in cahoots, both traitors. That destroyed Australian industry, and then Agenda 21 in 1992. I've actually read the thing cover to cover. It is such a green nonsense. It just isn't funny. And not too many people actually read it. I almost vomited several times reading that. Now, as is customary, we have to do the question, the poll of our viewers. Who in the audience thinks that we are all heading towards energy poverty? Hands up, including the panel. Craig, you're asleep, you need a coffee? Does anyone think that rising energy prices are not causing poverty? No one. That's very interesting. So on that note, and unfortunately we've run out of time, let's put our hands together to thank our magnificent panel who partake. Malcolm's flown all the way from Brisbane to meet us. Thank you very much.